Ensign Lena Doyle had not slept in 31 hours, and her eyes felt like someone had rubbed sand into them. She sat at her sensor monitoring station on the lower deck of the UES Fortitude and stared at a screen full of numbers that had not changed in 2 days. She was 23 years old. She had graduated from the Fleet Technical Academy 11 months ago with the third highest score in her class. She had been told, more than once, that she had a bright future ahead of her. Right now, her future felt like a very small room made entirely of silence and recycled air. The Fortitude was running dark. That was the official term for it, dark running. It meant every active system on the ship was either shut off completely or dialed down so low that it produced almost no signal that anything outside the hull could detect. No navigation pings, no active scanning, no communication bursts. The ship floated in the black between two asteroid clusters on the edge of the Calder Belt and did absolutely nothing except exist quietly, like a very large held breath. Lena understood why they were doing it. She had read the mission brief 4 times in the 2 weeks before departure. She understood the strategy. She agreed with the strategy in the distant, intellectual way that she agreed with most things she had learned about in classrooms. But there was a significant difference between reading about dark running in a briefing document and actually sitting inside a blacked-out battleship for 9 days with no way to know what was happening outside, except for the passive sensors that fed her screen a slow, careful picture of the world in soft grays and faint lines. The passive sensors were showing her something right now that made her sit up straighter in her chair. There were ships coming, not human ships. She had learned the human fleet signatures in her first year of training. She could read a human engine plumed the way other people read their own handwriting. These were different. These were the long, slow-burning signatures of Drevari cruisers, wide and flat and faintly blue on her display. Moving in from the northern approach to the Calder Belt with the kind of patient, unhurried confidence that Lena had read about in reports but never seen with her own eyes. She counted them. Then she counted them again because the first number seemed too high. 14 ships. 14 Drevari warships moving in a broad, loose formation toward the human colony of Thresh Point, which was sitting about 60,000 kilometers off the Fortitude's starboard side, completely unaware that there was an Earth fleet battleship parked in the dark next to it. The colony had 2,300 people in it. It had a small security team, a single aging patrol cutter named the UES Gannett, and a colony administrator named Pete Hartley, who was, as far as Lena could tell from her passive intercepts, currently in the middle of drafting a budget proposal for new water recycling equipment. Lena's hand moved toward her console. She wanted to ping the upper deck. She wanted to send Commander Ray Holt the data immediately, because that was the correct procedure, and she had been trained to follow correct procedure, and her heart was beating faster than she would have liked, and sending the data upstairs felt like the right thing to do. She stopped herself. Active communications, even internal ship communications using the standard hardline relay, would produce a detectable signal if the Drevari had close-range passive listeners deployed. Commander Holt had explained this during the mission briefing. He had explained it calmly and clearly and without any drama, the way he explained everything. And he had said, if you see something on your screen and you need to tell me about it, use the written relay panel. Type it. Send it on the low-power physical line. Do not use the vocal system. Do not raise your voice. Do not do anything that produces a burst of any kind. Lena took a slow breath. She typed the message on the relay panel. 14 Drevari signatures confirmed. Northern approach, bearing toward Thresh Point. Formation loose, not combat spread. They look like they are settling in. She hit send and then folded her hands in her lap and waited. 20 seconds later, the relay panel lit up with a response from the upper deck. Confirmed. Continue passive monitoring. Log everything. Do not change your scan angle or frequency. Hold. That was it. Do not change your scan angle. Log everything. For words from the commander, and Lena realized her heart rate had actually slowed a little just from reading them. There was something about Ray Holt's steadiness that worked on people that way. She had noticed it in the 2 weeks of pre-mission briefings. He did not shout. He did not perform. He spoke as if he had already considered every possible thing that might happen and had decided, before it happened, what he was going to do about it. He was 54 years old, gray at the temples, with a face that looked like it had seen enough to stop being surprised by most things. Lena turned back to her screen and started logging. The Drevari did not arrive all at once. They came in 3 groups, separated by about 2 hours each, which Lena found interesting in a dark way. The first group of 5 ships took up a position between Thresh Point and the nearest open transit lane, blocking it without making any aggressive move. The second group of 5 spread out along the colony's southern approach. The third group, 4 ships, heavier class, the sensor signatures bigger and slower and deeper, positioned themselves directly in front of the colony, close enough that Thresh Point's own sensors would have no trouble seeing them. It was deliberate. The Drevari wanted to be seen. They wanted the colony to wake up and look at their screens and count 14 warships and understand very clearly what the situation was. By the time the third group settled into position, Thresh Point's emergency broadcast channel had come alive. Lena could read it on her passive intercepts, faint, crackled, but readable. Colony Administrator Pete Hartley had apparently stopped working on his budget proposal and was now requesting urgent contact with any Earth fleet vessel within range, his voice professionally calm, but carrying the particular quality of someone who was being very deliberate about not sounding afraid. There were no Earth fleet vessels within range. There was only the Fortitude, silent and invisible in the dark, and Lena at her sensor station logging everything with careful, steady hands. The Drevari opened a broad-spectrum channel about an hour after their final formation settled. The translation came through Lena's intercept feed in flat, literal text, the way machine translation always rendered Drevari communication, exact and precise and entirely stripped of the emotional layering that apparently existed in the original language, but that no translation algorithm had ever successfully captured. The message said, "This sector is designated under Drevari Expansion Protocol 7. The colony installation at this location is operating without valid registration under Expansion Protocol 7. The Drevari Collective requires that colony administration make contact within 6 hours to discuss transition terms. Failure to make contact will result in the beginning of a resource assessment process." Lena read it 3 times. Resource assessment process. She had seen that phrase before in the historical file she had studied at the academy. It was what the Drevari called the stage just before they began stripping a colony of everything useful: equipment, stored materials, infrastructure, and sometimes people, redirected as labor under the terms of whatever agreement the Drevari had decided to impose. They never called it anything that sounded violent. They had a gift for naming things in ways that made them sound like paperwork. Her relay panel lit up. It was from Corporal Danny Farr, who was stationed at the weapons control room 2 decks below her. "You seeing this, Lena?" She typed back, "Yes." His reply came fast. 14 ships. "We have enough for 14, right?" Lena looked at her display, then at the weapons readiness summary in the corner of her screen that she was not supposed to be reading, but had found herself checking anyway. She typed, "That is not our decision to make, Danny." There was a pause. Then, "I know. Just checking." She understood the feeling. The Fortitude was not a small ship. She was not designed for patrol work or diplomatic escort or the careful dance of being seen in the right place at the right time. She was a deep space battleship, purpose-built, with a weapons complement that Lena had spent 3 weeks studying in detail and that she still did not fully believe was real. The Fortitude could do things that Lena had only read about in classified technical manuals. She could do those things to 14 Drevari cruisers in a very short amount of time if someone told her to. But Commander Ray Holt had not told her to. Not yet. Lena went back to logging. The mistake happened on the 4th day. She had been awake for 27 hours by the time it happened, and she would later think about that number and wonder how much of it was her fault and how much of it was just the arithmetic of exhaustion catching up with a brain that had been under sustained quiet stress for 4 days straight. She would think about it for a long time after, and she would never quite settle on a clean answer. What happened was this. She was running a routine passive scan update, the kind she did every 3 hours according to her station protocol. The process was almost entirely automated. She set the parameters, initiated the sequence, and the system did the rest. She had done it 11 times already without incident. On the 12th time, her hands were slow and her eyes were gritty, and she set the wrong parameter. Instead of setting the scan sensitivity to passive only, she set it to active pulse minimum. It was a small pulse, the smallest the system could produce. It lasted for less than half a second. It would have been nearly undetectable in a system with normal background electromagnetic traffic. But the Calder Belt, for all its asteroid density, was very quiet electrically, and half a second of active scan pulse in a quiet system was like striking a single note on a piano in an empty building. Lena realized what she had done approximately 2 seconds after she had done it. She stared at the screen for one horrible, frozen moment, and then she corrected the parameter, canceled the scan, and sat very still with her face feeling hot, and her hands completely steady in the deliberate way that hands become steady when the brain is too frightened to let them shake. Then she typed a message to Commander Holt. "Sir, I made an error. I set a passive scan to active pulse minimum by mistake. Duration was under half a second. I have corrected and returned to passive parameters. The pulse was small, but it went out. I am sorry. Doyle." She hit send and then sat with the weight of it pressing down on her chest. In her head, a voice that sounded uncomfortably like her training instructor at the academy was listing everything that could happen because of a half-second active pulse. The Drevari could have picked it up. If they had, they would know something was out here. They might not know what. The pulse was too small and too short to carry a clear signature. But they would know something had moved in the dark, and that would change things, and changing things was the one outcome Commander Holt had been most careful about avoiding. The relay panel lit up. "Understood. Noted. Come to the command deck now." "Holt." Lena stood up on legs that felt slightly wrong, handed her station log to the junior sensor operator who covered her brakes, and climbed the 2 flights of stairs to the command deck. Commander Ray Holt was standing at the main display table when she got there. The command deck was dim and quiet, all the screens running at reduced brightness, 8 crew members working in focused silence at their individual stations. The air smelled like recycled oxygen and the faint metallic edge of electronics that had been running warm for too long. Holt looked up when she came in. He studied her face for a moment without speaking. "Sit down," he said. He said it quietly, not unkindly. She sat in the nearest empty chair. He sat across from her, elbows on the table. He was a large man, broadly built, and he had a habit of making himself smaller when he talked to junior crew, leaning in, keeping his voice low, not performing his rank. She had noticed it in the briefings and had found it reassuring, the way steadiness in other people is always reassuring. "Tell me what happened," he said. She told him. All of it, exactly as it had happened, in the same order it had happened. She did not soften anything or add anything. When she was finished, he nodded once. "Did you see any reaction from the Drevari formation after the pulse?" he asked. "No, sir. I watched for 40 seconds after. No change in their positioning or their signal output." "All right." He looked at the main display for a moment. The pulse was short enough and weak enough that it would have registered to them as background noise at this distance. Belt electromagnetic scatter would have masked most of it. What they probably saw, if they saw anything at all, is what the belt produces on its own about twice a day. I'm not going to tell you not to be worried, because you should be, but I'm also not going to tell you this is a crisis, because it is not. Lena said nothing. She was looking at her hands. "Doyle." She looked up. "You reported it immediately and accurately. That matters more than you think it does right now. There are officers in this fleet who would have spent 3 hours deciding whether to tell me at all. You sent that message inside of 60 seconds. That is the right thing, and it is harder than it sounds when you're the one who made the mistake." He paused. "Go get 4 hours of sleep. I mean that as an order, not a suggestion. Then come back and take your station." She left the command deck feeling something strange. Not fully relieved, not fully forgiven in the way she might have wanted to feel, but something more useful than either of those. She felt seen clearly and not destroyed by it. She felt, in some way she could not quite name, like she understood something about Ray Holt that she had not understood before. She slept for 4 hours and then went back to her station. On the 6th day, The Drevari began moving closer to Thresh Point. Not all 14 ships, just 2 of the heavy cruisers from the front group, inching forward in a way that looked almost casual, the way a large animal moves when it wants to demonstrate that it is not hurrying and does not need to hurry, because it is already in control. They stopped at 30,000 kilometers from the colony platform and held there. It was still too far for any direct action, but it was close enough that Thresh Point's visual sensors would be able to see them without magnification. Administrator Pete Hartley sent 3 more emergency broadcasts that day. His voice on the intercept feed was steady, which Lena respected enormously. He was a civilian. He had a budget proposal on his desk and 2,300 people depending on him, and he was sitting inside a colony platform with a single aging patrol cutter for defense, and he was keeping his voice steady. The Drevari responded to his second broadcast with a brief communication that said, in the flat machine translation, "We acknowledge your contact. Transition discussions will begin when your administration confirms acceptance of Expansion Protocol 7 registration. We are prepared to discuss terms." Hartley's response, which came back about 40 minutes later, said, "This colony operates under the Earth Consolidated Outer Systems Charter and does not recognize Drevari Expansion Protocol 7 as applicable to this sector. We are requesting contact with Earth Fleet Command and with the Galactic Mediation Council. We respectfully ask that your ships maintain their current distance while those contacts are established." Lena read it on her intercept feed and felt a quiet, deep respect for the administrator that she did not entirely know what to do with. He was stalling. He was doing it with legal language and formal politeness, the same way you might use a chair to hold a door closed during a storm. Not because you thought the chair would stop the storm, but because it was the thing you had available, and doing something was better than doing nothing. She wondered if he knew there was a battleship parked in the dark 60,000 kilometers away, listening. He did not know. That was part of the plan. No communication had gone to Thresh Point about the Fortitude. Holt had explained why, during the briefings. The fewer people who knew the ship was there, the smaller the chance of any signal, any slip, any moment of human relief that might show up as a change in behavior that the Drevari could read. The colony was acting frightened because they were frightened, and that was real, and real was harder to pick apart than any performance. It felt unkind. Lena had thought about that on the 3rd day and had not stopped thinking about it. 2,300 people sitting in a colony with 14 warships pointed at them, asking for help that was not coming in the way they thought it was not coming. And 60,000 kilometers away, invisible, a ship sat and watched and waited and said nothing. She understood it. She had been given the reasons, and the reasons were good, and she agreed with them the way she agreed with most things she had studied. But understanding a thing and being fully comfortable with it were different, and she had stopped pretending to herself that they were the same. On the 7th day, the Drevari sent a new message to the colony. It said, "You have made contact with Earth Fleet Command. We have monitored your broadcast attempts. Earth Fleet response time from the nearest confirmed fleet position is 17 days minimum. We are prepared to begin discussions now, before that response arrives, so that the terms can be favorable to your population. This offer will remain open for 48 hours. Lena read it twice, and then sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. They knew about the fleet response time. They had done their homework. They had calculated correctly that the nearest confirmed Earth fleet position was 17 days out, and they were offering Thresh Point a chance to settle before that help arrived, with the implication being that the terms would only get worse the longer the colony held out. It was a clean, precise piece of psychological pressure, and it would have worked on any colony that did not know something the Drevari did not know. Thresh Point did not know it either. But Thresh Point did not need to know it. Thresh Point just needed to keep stalling. Lena sent a relay message to Danny Farr at the weapons station. "Did you see the new Drevari message?" His reply, "Yes." 17 days, they said. They think they're clever. She typed, "They are clever. They just do not know everything." A pause. Then, "How long do you think the commander waits?" She had been asking herself the same question for 2 days. She typed, "Until they stop giving Thresh Point room. When the colony has no more moves, we move." There was a longer pause. Then Danny typed, "I trust him." Lena looked at those 3 words on the relay screen for a moment. Then she typed, "So do I." and went back to her logs. On the 8th day, something small happened that Lena would remember for the rest of her career. She was on a scheduled break, one of the 3-hour rest periods that Holt had built into the crew schedule with the same careful deliberateness he brought to everything else. She was in the crew lounge on Deck 3, eating a food packet that described itself as chicken and rice and tasted like neither, when Commander Holt came in. Not on any official business, he was just walking through. He saw her and stopped. "How are you doing, Doyle?" he asked. Not as a formality. The way he said it made clear he actually wanted to know. She thought about it. She said, "I'm doing all right, sir. I keep thinking about Thresh Point, about Administrator Hartley. He keeps sending those broadcasts and nothing comes back." Holt sat down across from her. He folded his hands on the table. Outside the porthole behind him, there was nothing but black, because the porthole shielding was up on all the viewports, another dark-running precaution. "I've been in 2 situations similar to this one," he said. "Not identical. No 2 are ever identical, but similar in the shape of them. There's a piece of it that never gets easy, which is the part where you're watching people be afraid and you cannot tell them why it's going to be all right." "Does it get to you?" she asked. She was not sure a second later if that had been appropriate, but it was out. He did not seem bothered by it. He looked at the table for a moment. Then he said, "Yes. That is the honest answer. It gets to me every time. I think it is supposed to. If it stopped getting to me, I would stop trusting my own judgment about when to move." She looked at him. She said, "Is that why you wait as long as you do?" He said, "Partly. The other part is that moving too soon costs us the advantage we spent 8 days building. And the advantage we built matters, not just for Thresh Point, but for every colony in this sector that is watching what happens here. If we do this right, the Drevari walk away from 14 colonies they were planning to pressure next. That is the math. But the math only works if we hold." Lena thought about that. She said, "How do you know when to stop holding?" Holt was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "When the colony has nothing left to stall with. When Hartley runs out of legal arguments and formal requests, and the Drevari start moving forward instead of waiting. That is the moment. Not a second before, and not a second after." She nodded. She finished her food packet. He stood up and left without ceremony, and she sat alone in the small lounge and looked at the shielded porthole and thought about Administrator Hartley composing careful, formal messages to ships that were not coming from the direction anyone was looking. The 48 hours ran out on the morning of the 9th day. The Drevari response to the deadline was not dramatic. It never was with the Drevari. They moved 3 more ships forward. Not the heavy cruisers, but the mid-range class, faster and more maneuverable, and repositioned them in a tighter arc around the colony's approach corridors. Lena watched it happen on her passive feed with a focus that felt almost physical, like she was holding something fragile in both hands and trying not to drop it. Then the Drevari sent a new message to Thresh Point. "The transition discussion window has closed. We are beginning preliminary resource assessment. Colony administration is advised to secure all personnel inside the primary habitat modules. This is for population safety during the assessment process." Lena's hands stopped moving on her keyboard. "Secure all personnel inside the primary habitat modules." She knew what that meant from the historical files. It meant, get everyone in one place where we can account for them. It was the first step in a process that had, in 8 documented cases in the outer systems over the past 15 years, ended with the colony being stripped and its population relocated as labor under terms nobody had agreed to voluntarily. She sent a relay message to the command deck. Then she realized she did not need to, because at that exact moment, every screen in her station changed color. The low amber standby tint that had been running on every display for 9 days shifted. It was a small change, not red, not any alarm color, just a cooler, cleaner shade of white, the kind that meant systems were waking up. Lena knew that color. She had seen it in training simulations, described in technical manuals, mentioned in briefings. It was the color the Fortitude's displays turned when dark running was ending. It was the color of a ship that had finished waiting. Her relay panel lit up. It was from the command deck. 3 words, and Lena read them, and she felt something she had not expected to feel. Not excitement, not fear, but something quieter and more solid than either. Something that felt like the moment before a very important thing becomes real. The message said, "All stations ready." Lena straightened in her chair. She checked her console. She verified her sensor array. She updated her log entry with a precise timestamp and the current Drevari formation positions. All 14 ships, coordinates exact. Then she folded her hands in her lap because her hand were shaking slightly and she did not want them to, and she breathed slow and steady and waited for Commander Ray Holt to do what she had spent 9 days watching him prepare to do. Above her, on the command deck, she could feel the ship changing. Not a sound exactly. The Fortitude was still very quiet, but a vibration in the hull that was different from the vibration of a ship holding still. It was the vibration of systems coming online in sequence, of power moving through conduits that had been cold for 9 days, of a machine that had been pretending to be nothing, remembering piece by piece what it actually was. Thresh Point was 60,000 kilometers away. 14 Drevari warships surrounded it. Administrator Hartley had just been told to secure his population inside the habitat modules, and he had no idea that anything was about to change. The Fortitude's cloaking field, the technology that had made 9 days of invisibility possible, that had cost more to develop than any 3 other ships in the fleet combined, that only 4 people outside the project team even knew existed yet, began its shutdown sequence. It did not fail. It did not collapse. It ended deliberately in a controlled release, the way you lower a curtain instead of tearing it down. The ship became visible, not all at once. Lena's sensors showed her the moment it happened. The passive feed she had been staring at for 9 days suddenly showed her own ship's outline blooming into the electromagnetic spectrum like a sunrise that had been waiting behind a closed door. The Fortitude sensor signature filled her screen completely for one disorienting second, and then the software corrected for proximity and cleaned the image, and she could see both the Fortitude and the Drevari formation on the same display. 14 ships, and one. The Drevari formation began to react. She could see it in the sensor data, repositioning signals, new power readings from their drive systems, the specific electromagnetic signature of weapons arrays going from standby to active. They were surprised. That much was clear. But they were also professional, and professional militaries did not freeze when surprised. They moved. They moved, and the Fortitude was already watching them. All 14 ships painted with targeting solutions that had been updated every 90 seconds for 9 days. On her relay panel, Lena saw a final message from the command deck. It was not for her specifically. It was the ship-wide text that Holt had sent to every station simultaneously. It said, "This is Commander Holt. We are now visible. All crew, this is the moment we have been building toward for 9 days. You have all done your jobs exactly right. Stay at your stations, stay focused, and let us do what we came here to do." Lena read it twice. She noticed, with some distant part of her brain, that she was no longer shaking. She put her hands back on her console. She was ready. The Fortitude filled the space beside Thresh Point the way a mountain fills a valley. Not quickly, not violently, but completely. One moment the sensor displays on 14 Drevari warships showed nothing unusual in the dark around the colony. The next moment, they showed something that had no place in any of their mission planning documents, any of their intelligence files, or any of the carefully calculated assumptions their fleet commanders had built this entire operation on. Lena Doyle watched it happen from her sensor station on the lower deck. She watched her own ship bloom into visibility on the passive feed, a shape so large it pushed the edges of her display. She watched the Drevari formation change, not breaking apart, not running, because the Drevari were professionals and professionals did not run, but shifting, adjusting, tightening in the way that a person tightens when they're surprised and trying very hard not to show it. Their weapons arrays went active. She could see it in the electromagnetic readings. 14 ships, all of them, powering up simultaneously. The light on her display changed as all that energy came online at once. Then Commander Ray Holt opened a channel. His voice came through the ship's internal speakers at the same time. It went out on the Drevari diplomatic frequency and the colony emergency band. He did not raise it. He did not perform. He spoke the way he always spoke, steady and direct, like a man who had thought carefully about what he was going to say before he said it. He said, "This is Commander Ray Holt of the United Earth ship Fortitude. I am addressing the Drevari fleet currently surrounding Thresh Point colony. You now have a targeting solution on every ship in your formation. I am not here to fire first. I am here to talk. I am asking your fleet commander to open a direct channel within the next 3 minutes." That was all. No threats. No list of weapon specifications. No demonstration of what the Fortitude could do, because the Fortitude size and power were already visible on every sensor screen in the Drevari fleet, and listing capabilities on top of that would have been the kind of thing you did when you were nervous, and Ray Holt was not nervous. Lena realized she was holding her breath. She let out slowly. The relay panel beside her station lit up. It was Danny far from the weapons room. He said 3 minutes. Do you think they answer in 3 minutes? She typed back, yes. They're looking at our ship right now. They will answer. She was right. 2 minutes and 18 seconds after Holt finished speaking, the Drevari response came back on the diplomatic channel. The translation software rendered it in the flat, exact way it always did, stripping the layered tone out of the Drevari language and leaving just the words. The Drevari Collective does not recognize the authority of Earth fleet vessels in Expansion Protocol 7 designated zones. The vessel now identified as UE's Fortitude is advised to withdraw from this sector immediately. The Drevari fleet is conducting a legal and authorized resource assessment under collective law. Lena read it off her intercept feed. She noticed that it did not say anything about the targeting solutions on their ships. It did not acknowledge the size of the Fortitude or the number of weapons currently locked onto their formation. It was worded as if nothing unusual had happened, as if a massive human battleship appearing out of nothing in the dark beside their formation was simply a procedural matter that their legal framework could absorb. She had studied the Drevari long enough to understand what that meant. It meant they were buying time. The words were not for Holt. They were for the record. They were the kind of language you used when you needed documentation that you had not backed down without a fight. Holt understood it too. His reply came back 40 seconds later. He said, "I have read Expansion Protocol 7. I have also read the Galactic Outer Systems Charter, the Calder Belt Neutrality Agreement of 2187, and the Colonial Settlement Rights Framework that Thresh Point was registered under 11 years ago. Thresh Point is a legally established colony in neutrality-designated sector. I am prepared to walk through the relevant documents with your commander, if that is helpful. What I am not prepared to do is leave. My ship is not going anywhere." There was a pause of about 4 minutes. Then the Drevari channel opened again. "This matter will be referred to Collective Legal Counsel. The Drevari fleet will maintain its current position during the referral period." Maintain its current position. Lena looked at the formation on her display. The 14 ships had not moved in the 6 minutes since the Fortitude uncloaked, except for the adjustment tightening she had noticed at the start. They were sitting still now, which was either discipline or uncertainty, and she suspected it was both. She sent a message to Danny. "They're stalling. He is letting them stall." His reply came back. "Why does he let them stall?" She thought about it. She typed, "Because a stall is better than a shot. While they're stalling, nobody is shooting." A pause. Then, fair point. Lena went back to her screen and kept logging. The next 3 hours were the strangest hours Lena had experienced in 11 months of fleet service. The Fortitude and 14 Drevari warships sat in space about 60,000 kilometers from Thresh Point and did almost nothing. The Drevari sent 2 more formal communications that went through the same pattern, citing Protocol 7, requesting withdrawal, using careful legal language that was clearly written for the record rather than for any practical purpose. Holt responded to each one with the same calm, specific references to the treaty framework that protected the colony. Meanwhile, on Thresh Point, Administrator Pete Hartley had apparently received Holt's opening channel message and was now sending his own communication to the Fortitude. Lena could read it on the passive intercept. It said, in a voice that had lost some of its professional steadiness, "Fortitude, this is Thresh Point Colony Administration. We are reading your transmission. We have 2,300 people here, and we would very much like to know what is happening and what we should do." Holt's reply to the administrator was brief and kind. He said, "Mr. Hartley, please keep your people calm and inside the habitat modules for now. You are safe. This situation is being managed. I will give you a full briefing as soon as I am able." Lena read that exchange and felt something move in her chest. "You are safe." 2 words, and Hartley would have to take them on faith from a voice he had never heard before, belonging to a ship he had not known existed an hour ago. She thought about what it took to say those words with genuine certainty behind them, to know, not just hope, that the person you were saying them to was actually going to be all right. She thought Holt had that certainty. She thought that was why the words worked. At the 3-hour mark, something changed. The change came not from the main Drevari formation, but from one ship on the outer edge of the southern group. Lena caught it first on her sensor feed. A small but very clear shift in the ship's engine output, the kind of shift that happened when a vessel was preparing to move. Not a large movement, not a charge toward the Fortitude, just a repositioning, the ship sliding gradually toward a gap in the formation that would give it a cleaner angle on the colony platform. She sent the data upstairs immediately. No hesitation this time, no frozen moment. 9 days had trained her well. The relay panel showed that Holt received her report. 12 seconds later, his voice went out on the Drevari channel again. He said, "To the Drevari vessel currently repositioning on the southern approach, I am asking you to hold your position. I want to be direct with you. If any ship in your formation changes its bearing toward Thresh Point colony, I will have to treat that as a hostile move. I do not want that. Please hold your position." The ship stopped moving. Lena let out a breath she had not been aware of holding. She updated her log with the exact time stamp and the exact position coordinates. Her hands were steady. She noticed they were steady without having to tell them to be, and she thought that was probably what 9 days of practice felt like when it worked. The shot came at the 5-hour mark, and it came from a different ship than the one Lena had been watching. She would go over her logs afterward and understand what had happened. The ship that fired was one of the mid-range cruisers in the forward group, positioned closest to the Fortitude. The crew of that ship had been sitting inside their vessel for 5 hours looking at a battleship that should not exist, that had appeared from nowhere, that was carrying weapons they had not known about, and that had been locked on their ship for the entire 5 hours. The Drevari were professionals, but they were also people, and people who sit under that kind of pressure for 5 hours sometimes make decisions that their commanders did not authorize. It was a single shot, a short-range energy pulse, not a full weapons discharge. In military terms, it would have been classified as a warning shot, the kind of thing you fired when you wanted to demonstrate that you were still capable of action without actually committing to a full engagement. It was, in the careful language of fleet tactical manuals, an unauthorized escalatory action by a junior weapons officer acting without orders. On the Fortitude, it hit the upper port sensor array. The impact was not catastrophic. The Fortitude was built to absorb far more than a single energy pulse from a mid-range cruiser. But it was real. The lights on the command deck flickered. 2 secondary systems went offline automatically as the protection protocols kicked in. Lena felt the vibration through the floor of her station. A single low thud, like something heavy falling one deck above her. Her displays showed the hit. Her displays showed exactly which ship had fired. Her displays showed, in precise detail, what the Fortitude's weapon systems were currently capable of doing to that ship and to every other ship in the formation within the next 45 seconds. She did not move. She did not type anything on her relay panel. She waited. The next 8 seconds were the quietest 8 seconds of Lena Doyle's life. Then Commander Holt's voice came through the internal speakers, calm and completely unchanged from every other time she had heard him speak. He said, "All stations, report status. Weapons, do not fire. Repeat, do not fire. I need damage reports on the upper port array." The response came in from various stations around the ship over the next 90 seconds. Upper port sensor array was down. 2 exterior communication nodes were offline. 1 crew member in the upper port maintenance section had been thrown against a wall by the impact and had a broken arm. No fatalities. The ship was fully operational. All weapons systems were functioning. Holt listened to every report. Then he was quiet for a moment. Then he opened the Drevari channel. His voice was exactly the same as it had been 5 hours ago. He said, "To the Drevari fleet commander, one of your vessels is fired on the Fortitude. I want you to know that we are not returning fire. I'm not going to pretend that did not happen, and we will address it, but I am choosing in this moment not to escalate. I'm asking your commander to get on this channel right now. Personally, not through a relay officer. We need to talk directly." Lena stared at her screen. She had expected many things in the 5 hours since the Fortitude uncloaked. She had expected the stalling. She had expected the formal communications. She had expected tension and careful maneuvering. She had not expected a human battleship to absorb a hit from an enemy warship and respond by saying we are not returning fire. She thought for a moment about what the weapon station could have done in those 8 seconds of quiet. She knew the numbers. She had studied the Fortitude's specifications with the same careful attention she brought to everything. In 45 seconds, the Fortitude could have ended the conversation entirely. 14 ships, every targeting solution updated and exact. One order from Holt and the Drevari fleet threatening Thresh Point would have simply ceased to be a problem. It said, "Do not fire." She was still thinking about that when the Drevari channel opened. Not with a relay officer's voice, not with translated text, but with the direct audio feed of what the translation software identified as a senior command-level Drevari speaker. The translation came through in the flat machine voice. "I am Fleet Commander Drevari. The vessel that fired did so without my order. I have already confined the weapons officer responsible. I acknowledge that this was a serious breach of engagement protocol." Holt said, "I appreciate you telling me that directly, Commander. I have a crew member with a broken arm. I want you to know I'm not going to use that shot as a reason to fire on your fleet. But I need you to understand clearly that the situation has now changed, and the next step we take needs to come from you, not from me." A pause. Then Drevari said, "What do you want?" And Holt said, "I want you to withdraw your ships from Thresh Point. All 14 of them, in good order, starting within the next 30 minutes. In return, I will not report this incident to the Galactic Mediation Council as a hostile engagement. I will log it as an unauthorized individual action, which is what it was, and your fleet's record stays clean. Thresh Point stays free. Everyone goes home." The silence on the channel lasted 90 seconds. Lena counted them. Then Drevari said, "I need 20 minutes. Holt said, "You have them." The 20 minutes that followed were different from the 5 hours before them. Lena could feel the difference in the air of the ship, not relaxed, not celebratory, but altered in some way she could not fully name. The tension that had been sitting on the crew like a physical weight since the moment the Fortitude uncloaked had shifted into something else. It was not gone. It was changed. It had become the tension of waiting for something you were now reasonably sure was going to happen, which was a different and more bearable thing than the tension of waiting for something you could not predict. At the 12-minute mark, a private channel request came into the Fortitude's diplomatic communications array. It was not from Fleet Commander Drevari. It was from a different Drevari ship, one of the mid-range cruisers in the Southern Group, not the one that had fired. The identification code on the channel request was a subcommand rank designation. Lena flagged it immediately and sent it upstairs. Holt accepted the channel. The voice that came through was younger than Drevari. The translation was the same flat machine rendering, but even through it Lena could detect something in the cadence that sounded like controlled anxiety. The voice said, "Commander Holt, my name is not important. I am a subcommander in this fleet. I want to tell you something that I think you should know before the withdrawal begins." Holt said, "Go ahead." The subcommander said, 3 members of my crew are from a colony that was processed under expansion protocol 74 years ago. They joined the collective fleet under the labor integration program, which is what we call it when a colony population is absorbed. They did not choose to join. They were given the option of joining or being classified as unregistered residents, which carries a different and worse set of consequences under collective law. I have served with these 3 people for 2 years. They're good crew members. I think about them every time we run an operation like this one. I wanted someone to know that. Lena sat very still at her station. She read the translation off her intercept feed twice. Holt was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I understand. I hear what you are telling me. Is there anything you need from me right now? The sub-commander said, No. I only wanted someone to know. I'm going to close this channel now. Holt said, Thank you for telling me. The channel closed. Lena sat with those words for a moment. 3 crew members from a colony that had been absorbed. 2 years of working beside them. A sub-commander calling a human battleship on a private channel during a withdrawal negotiation to say, I wanted someone to know. She thought about what it cost a person to make that call. She thought about what it meant that the person had made it anyway. She added a note to her log. Then she went back to watching the formation. Fleet Commander Derek Vell came back on the main channel at the 18-minute mark. He said, The Drevari fleet will withdraw. We will begin repositioning in 4 minutes. The withdrawal will be complete within 90 minutes of start. I am transmitting a formal withdrawal acknowledgement to Thresh Point Colony on the standard colony communications frequency. Holt said, Thank you, Commander. I will remain in position until the withdrawal is complete. My ship will not interfere with your movement. Derek Vell said, One question, Commander Holt. How long was your ship in this sector before today? Holt said, 9 days. There was a pause that lasted about 4 seconds. Then Derek Vell said, 9 days. And we did not detect you. Holt said, That is correct. Another pause. Then Derek Vell said, I see. And there is only one of your ship. Holt said, I'm not going to answer that question, Commander. You understand why. A pause. Then Derek Vell said, Yes. I understand why. Beginning withdrawal now. The channel closed. Lena watched the formation on her sensor display begin to move. It happened in stages, not chaotically, not in a rush, but in the careful, practiced sequence of a professional military withdrawal. The outer ships moved first, pulling back from the colony's transit corridors. Then the southern group, steady and deliberate. Then the 2 heavy cruisers that had been positioned directly in front of the colony platform, backing away with the slow dignity of large objects that had decided, for their own reasons, that somewhere else was preferable. She logged every movement. She logged the exact time each ship cleared the exclusion zone she had mentally drawn around Thresh Point in her head. She logged the moment the last Drevari ship's sensor signature passed beyond the outer asteroid cluster of the Calder Belt and began its transition toward the jump corridor that would take them out of the sector entirely. It took 87 minutes. When the last ship disappeared from her passive feed, Lena sat back in her chair and put both hands flat on the edge of her console and breathed. Commander Holt's voice came through the internal speakers about 4 minutes after the last Drevari ship cleared the sensor range. He said, This is Commander Holt. The Drevari fleet has completed its withdrawal from the Thresh Point sector. Thresh Point Colony is secure. All crew, you have done your jobs with exactly the kind of skill and steadiness that this mission required. I want you to know that I am aware of what the last 9 days cost each of you, and I am grateful for all of it. Stand down to standard operations. Department heads, please submit status reports to the command deck within the hour. That was it. No speech. No dramatic declaration. Just a clear account of what had happened and a recognition that the crew had done something difficult. Lena thought it was exactly right. Danny Farr's message appeared on her relay panel almost immediately after Holt finished speaking. It said, We did it. She typed back, The commander did it. His reply, We kept the ship quiet for 9 days. That counts. She thought about that. She typed, Yes. That counts. She sat for a moment, looking at those words on her screen. Then she started writing up her full sensor log for the department report, because the mission was over but the documentation was not, and she was the kind of person who finished things properly. The communication to Thresh Point came from Holt directly, about 40 minutes after the withdrawal was complete. He opened the colony channel and spoke to Administrator Pete Hartley in the same plain, unhurried voice he used for everything. He said, Mr. Hartley, the Drevari fleet has withdrawn from your sector. They have also transmitted a formal acknowledgement of Thresh Point's operational status under the Outer Systems Charter, which your colony administration will have received on the standard frequency. Your colony is free and your people are safe. I want to apologize for not being able to contact you sooner or tell you we were here. I know these 9 days were very difficult for you and your people. Lena had the channel open on her intercept feed. She heard the pause on Hartley's end. It was a long pause, longer than a technical delay. She thought she understood what was happening inside that pause. She thought Hartley was probably standing at his console in the colony administrator's office with his hand over his face, doing the thing that people did when a weight they had been carrying for 9 days suddenly was not there anymore, and their body did not quite know what to do about that. When Hartley spoke, his voice was very controlled, and the control sounded effortful in a way that was completely human and completely understandable. He said, "Commander Holt, were you here the whole time?" Holt said, "Yes." 9 days. Hartley said, "And you knew it was going to be all right." Holt said, "I believed it was going to be all right. There is a small difference, and I think you deserve the honest version." Another pause. Then Hartley said, "Commander Holt, I have a budget proposal on my desk for new water recycling equipment that I have been trying to finish for 3 weeks. I believe I'm going to go and complete it now, if that is acceptable." Holt said, "That sounds like exactly the right thing to do, Mr. Hartley." Lena heard what she thought was a quiet, slightly unsteady exhale on Hartley's end before the channel closed. She sat with that sound for a moment. A colony administrator on a small platform in the outer systems, 2,300 people depending on him, 9 days of watching warships circle his home, and now sitting down to finish a budget proposal for water recycling equipment. There was something in that image that felt deeply and specifically human to her, in a way that she was not sure she could explain to anyone who had not heard it. She wrote it into her log, anyway. She wrote, "Administrator Hartley's response upon learning the colony was safe. Noted for personal record. It was not part of the official sensor data." She noted it anyway. 2 hours after the withdrawal, Lena was finishing her department report when the command deck sent a general message that crew members not on active watch were free to use the observation lounge on Deck 4. The viewport shielding was coming down for the first time in 9 days. She almost did not go. She had a report to finish, and she was tired in the deep, solid way that came from days of sustained focus finally releasing all at once. But something made her save the report, close her station log, and climb the stairs to Deck 4. The observation lounge was a small room with 3 wide viewports. When the shielding came down, the ports showed the Calder Belt asteroids on one side and the faint distant lights of Thresh Point colony on the other. Between them, in the dark, there was nothing unusual. No Drevari formation. No 14 warships arranged in careful threat. Just space, ordinary and vast, and full of the same distant stars that had been there before the mission and would be there long after it. 7 other crew members were already in the lounge. Nobody was talking much. They were just looking out the viewports, which Lena understood completely. After 9 days of screens and sensor feeds and data, the simple fact of a window showing you actual space was something that needed a moment to itself. She found a place at the portside viewport and looked out. Thresh Point was not visible individually. It was too far and too small to see without magnification, but she knew the general direction and she looked at it anyway. 2,300 people. A budget proposal for water recycling equipment. A man keeping his voice steady for 9 days because he did not have any other option. Corporal Danny Farr came and stood beside her after a few minutes. He was shorter than she had imagined from his relay messages, with a round, tired face and dark eyes that were currently fixed on the viewport with the expression of someone who was very glad to be looking at something real. He said, "This is the first time I have met you in person." She said, "I know. 9 days of messages, and this is the first time." He said, "You were right, by the way. Earlier, when you said we kept the ship quiet and that counts." She thought about it. She said, "The shot we never fired is what saved them. Not just the weapons we have. The fact that we did not use them when we could have." He looked at her for a moment. He said, "Holt did not fire back. After that cruiser hit us. He had every right, and he chose not to." She said, "Yes." He said, "I've been thinking about that." She said, "So have I." They were quiet for a while, both looking at the viewport, both thinking about it in the way that people think about something that does not resolve neatly into a clear lesson, but that changes the way you see things anyway. She had joined a fleet because she believed in something. She had been able to say that in the abstract for 11 months, in a way that young people say things they believe before they have seen what the belief actually looks like in practice. Now she had seen it. It looked like 9 days of silence in the dark. It looked like a commander who said, "Do not fire," after a ship shot at him. It looked like a sub-commander making a private call to say, "I wanted someone to know." It looked like an administrator on a colony platform going back to his budget proposal because the crisis was over and the work still needed doing. It did not look like she had imagined it would back in the academy classroom. It was quieter than she had imagined, less dramatic, more patient, more human, in ways she was still working out how to put into words. She thought she would be working that out for a while. Commander Ray Holt found her in the lounge about an hour later. He came in quietly, the way he did everything, and stood at the center viewport without any ceremony. Most of the other crew members had drifted back to their duties by then. Only Lena and Danny remained, and Danny excused himself after a minute with a small nod to the commander that was almost a bow without being one. Holt looked out the viewport for a moment. Then he said, "Good work, Ensign Doyle. Your logs were some of the most complete sensor documentation I have seen from a junior station officer." She said, "Thank you, sir. I want to ask you something, if that is all right." He said, "Go ahead." She said, "After they shot at us, you had every targeting solution updated. 14 ships. You could have ended the engagement in under a minute. Why did you not?" He looked at the viewport. He was quiet for a moment in the way of someone who has thought about a question before and is choosing now which part of the answer to give. He said, "Because ending the engagement in under a minute would have been the easiest thing I have ever done in this uniform. And the easiest thing is not always the right thing." The Drevari withdrew. Thresh Point is free. Nobody else is dead. If I had fired back after that shot, this story ends differently, not just for this sector, but for every sector where the Drevari and humans are going to have to figure out how to share space over the next 100 years. One decision, 1 minute, those things carry a long way. She thought about the subcommander's private channel, the 3 crew members from an absorbed colony. She said, "Do you think the Drevari will come back here?" He said, "Probably not to Thresh Point. The record of this withdrawal goes into the Galactic Mediation Council files. It becomes part of the documented history of what happened when they tried Protocol 7 in a neutrality sector. That documentation matters. Other colonies in similar situations are going to be able to point to this file." She said, "And the other colonies in the drift that we're watching." He said, "They saw the Drevari withdraw. They do not know why, and they do not need to know all of it. What they know is that Thresh Point asked for help, and the help came. That is the part that reaches the people who need to hear it." Lena looked out the viewport. The stars were exactly the same as they had always been. The dark was the same dark. But the sector felt different to her than it had 9 days ago, in a way that she thought had nothing to do with the physical space and everything to do with what had just happened inside it. She said, "Sir, in a crew lounge a few days ago, you said that if the hardest part stopped getting to you, you would stop trusting your own judgment. Do you still feel that way? After today?" He looked at her. He said, "Yes, especially after today." She nodded. She thought she understood. He said, "Get some sleep, Doyle. Actual sleep, not 4 hours. I want a full sensor summary on my desk in the morning, but the morning is fine. Tonight is for sleeping." She said, "Yes, sir." He left the lounge without ceremony, the way he had entered it. Lena stayed at the viewport for a few more minutes, looking at the dark and the stars and the faint general direction of Thresh Point, where man was probably finishing a budget proposal for water recycling equipment, and 2,300 people were settling down to a night that felt like any other night, which was the best possible outcome. She thought about power. She thought about what it meant to have enough of it to end something in 45 seconds, and to look at that option clearly and choose a different one. She thought about the fact that the most powerful thing the Fortitude had done in 9 days was sit still in the dark and say nothing. She thought about what she wanted to do with the years ahead of her in this uniform. What kind of officer she wanted to be. What kind of decisions she wanted to be the kind of person who made. She did not have all the answers. She was 23 years old, and she had been doing this for 11 months, and she understood, now more clearly than before, that the answers to those questions were not things you found once and kept. They were things you kept working out, every mission, every decision, every moment when the easiest option was sitting right there and you had to look at it honestly and decide. She was glad she had come on this mission. She was glad she had made the mistake on day 4 and reported it immediately. She was glad she had sat in the crew lounge and listened to Ray Holt talk about the parts of the job that did not stop getting to him. She filed all of it away in the place where she kept the things that mattered. Then she turned away from the viewport and went to sleep.